I know there's like 2 days of session here, right? A lot of conversations on data and the latest in technology and the direction that we're going with Gen AI and all of that, right? I'm probably the only speaker that's not going to talk about technology, right? I'm here to talk about something that's next level, right? Which is how do you drive business impact from data, right? Because at the end of the day, we are only as good as the business impact we drive, and oftentimes the two of them are not necessarily correlated. So that's what I'm here to talk about. And feel free to stop me. I'm okay with questions along the way. So I'm going to start with there are two components to drive business impact from data, right? What you have on the left-hand side is the technical capability, right? In any organization or for any individual, right? You need to have the technical capability to be able to drive your data agenda forward. And that is what the 2 days here is going to be, and that's what I'm assuming 98% of what each of you spend your time on is, right? But there is something on the right-hand side, which is the DNA of an org, or really the DNA of a data professional, that is something that's overlooked often, particularly in the India context. We overlook it, and that's, to me, that's a differentiator between having a good company versus a great company, or a good data career versus a great data career, right? So, like tech plus data DNA is really where the value is, right? Like just to sort of give you a little bit of a background for myself, I was born and raised in Bangalore, and then I went to the US, did my MBA, then worked for Capital One, and between that I did my GMP at Harvard Business School. 15 years at Capital One. I don't know how many of you know Capital One, but Capital One is the only bank in the world to this day, as far as I know, where the P&L is owned by the data function. The bank went IPO in '94, and at that point, it was like a really teeny company, which today you can say a fintech, and that was before the term fintech was coined. And they were competing against the Citibank and American Express of the world that had 200-year-old history. But in the next 10 years, from '95 to 2005, Capital One moved from being a small fintech startup, if you want to call it that, to being a top 10 bank in the US, all on the back of data. If you go read up it's a phenomenal story. Anybody in data should read about Capital One, because again, the company just tells you how data can be leveraged to compete in the market and win in the market, right? In a market as mature as the US, in 10 years, going from being like a startup to being top 10 is like a feat that nobody has achieved. And so I had the privilege of spending my first 15 years of my career there. And then I moved back to India and took a job at a GCC running a major, for a big bank, right? Like it hit me really hard. Like I'd never worked in India. I'd done my undergrad here, but didn't even do my master's, right? It hit me hard in many ways, right? Like you had the most brilliant analysts, you had the most brilliant data professionals, right? On any dimension, except one. They did not know how to think business. They did not know how to influence business. They did not know how to connect business to the data they were seeing. That just meant that, all of them was just going to spend the rest of their life providing data to somebody who makes the decision. And oftentimes, at least in that big bank, and I can tell you that's true for most of them, right? 8 of the 10 recommendations that went based on data did not see the light of the day. That's just like mind-boggling, right? You have the most talented people from a technical skill set standpoint, and then you have impact, which is like close to nothing, right? So, that's when it sort of hit me hard to say, okay, what's really going on here, right? Why is all of this not translating? And so what I'm going to share over the next 10, 15 minutes is my point of view on that, right? So if you're a founder, or if you are C-level person in an org, just take this as how do you set up your organization to actually let data give you a competitive advantage. If you are a professional, take this as what do you need to do to be able to go from a techie to the boardroom. So that's what the next few minutes are going to be about. So I'll sort of peel the onion a little bit, oversimplified, but I think that serves the purpose. I'm going to walk you through what in an organization or what in a person, leads to the driving the real impact, right? So first is the organization structure, right? So today I'm the Chief Data Officer for PayU, and I also have the data innovations business, which drives a third of the profits for PayU, right? So I'm one of the few people that has the geeky side with the data engineers and the data sciences, but also has a P&L, right? Like I was in Mumbai the last 3 days just meeting a bunch of banks trying to sell and stuff, right? So exercising both sides. The key thing is organization structure, right? Oftentimes when I go talk to CDOs at bank, right, and I do a lot of that as part of my job, the thing that comes about is, you talk to them when you pitch, you're like, okay, look, this is the data we have and how you can use the data to further your business and all of that. And the CDO will talk to you, they engage you at an intellectual level, and then you leave the room, they say, okay, let me think about it, come back. A month later, follow-ups later, you're still not able to get into the business, right? So when you go through this with multiple banks, what you realize is the CDO really doesn't have the influence in the org. They don't control the budget, they don't control the decision or the strategic direction. Because they have a big role. They sit horizontally where each of the businesses sort of come to them and say, I need this analytics done. Right? I need this data from your team, right? Which then means that their influence is limited in the decision making. So if you, again, like if you're setting up a company or if you're a C-level person, please make sure this is not happening in your organization, right? There's no point in really, really high-end analytics and data sciences if you're not driving business decisions based on that. So make sure that your CDO is empowered and every single person on your data team is empowered. And if you happen to be working in a place where that is not true, build the skills to start thinking business and find a place where you are actually driving business impact, right? Because after a point, how much, the technical skills can only take you so far. Like then you really have to be able to drive the business impact and have a conversation with the CEO and, So this is one. So alignment of KPIs. Again, like I was at a big bank, running their captive analytics out of Bangalore. Large team, big dollars, lot of decks, lot of Excel, lot of architects and stuff. But end of the year, when it came time for my review, it was all about, hey, did you bring in new techniques? Are you using the latest in data sciences? Is your partner in the US happy with you, right? It was never about how many, what is your dollar contribution this year, right? And then I went one step further, right? Because that's how I'm wired, and I was trained for many years. So I went one step further, and 1 year I kept the full log of every single thing my team did. And I said, look, year before this was the business impact. How many models were built? How many of them were implemented? And what was the impact of those decisions? And I kept a log of that. And then end of the year came, and time for self-appraisal. So I just said, you know what? I'm not going to write my self-appraisal. Here's a log, year over year. This is the business impact. I sent it to my boss and said, okay, and the boss was like the global head for the GCC, right? So the next meeting I had, the boss had read it and all of those. And then the feedback was like, no, I mean, it's all great, but it's business impact. Tell me how, for this center, how you have contributed, and like things like. Basically, that conversation led me to believe that the business impact wasn't really a KPI for me nor my boss. Their KPIs or OKRs were very different. And that's when I pressed the eject button and said, okay, 6 months later, I was out of there, right? And like I said, I have a job where my evaluation is based on the business impact I'm driving, right? So that's another thing, right? You will, as a professional or an organization, you're going to do what you're asked to do or what you're measured on. In a lot of organizations, there is a disconnect between business impact and and your OKRs. If you're a data function, right? If you're on sales, that's different. That's all commission. Or if you're on the strategy team, that's different. But somehow people think data people is a cost center. They just sit there and they drive things, but not business outcome. If you're not driving business outcome, then you're wasting your time. Okay. So this is another one, right? Data versus intuition. Data is compass, right? Data does not lie. Data tells you what wins, what doesn't win. You do a test, you know if A is greater than B or B is greater than A. Right? So the problem is a lot of times data is used to prove a point. Right? You could have some, like the CMO in an organization, and they think this product should be pitched, right? Then they're like, hey, we're thinking of pitching this product. Why don't you do some analysis, come back on if it makes sense, right? Guess what? If you go back and say it does not make sense, that's the end of your career, right? So being able to sort of, use your intuition and make data win over intuition, and I'm building a culture where data wins over intuition is important. And it's very rare. But those few places where that is the case, you will see that the companies are growing at a very different rate, right? Another thing I'll say about this is, see, these days there's a lot of new algorithms, right, that can do very complex things. So oftentimes when I'm reviewing a model with my data scientists, what I find is they take the 2,000 features they have, they throw it into their cat boost, and they say, okay, I've built a model, right? And then you're like, this feature number 1, what's really the intuition behind it, right? Why is it giving you 30% of the information value? They're like, I don't really know, right? The machine told me that's the right metric, and therefore I put it there. Wrong answer. If you built a model and you're seeing something, you really have to be able to explain that with the intuition behind it for a few reasons. Reason number 1, the problem with predictive models is that it assumes the past is reflective of the future. 2008 financial crisis. It works until one day where it stops working. When it stops working, if you don't understand why that feature was there, your bank is going to go burst. And it happened. Many banks went burst, right? Even like for us, we saw, to give you an example, right? So debt versus home equity, right, was a feature, which meant that if somebody has home equity, right, then you look at the ratio and you say, okay, more home equity is safer the customer. But when the tides shifted, house prices dropped, home equity became negative, but the model still kept it and said that if you have more mortgage, it translates into a better this thing, but it flipped on the thing, and banks that were not able to catch it in time lost their shirts. That's why intuition is important, right? You cannot just blindly do that. So, and another thing is, most of the value is created from data, is created when you find a counterintuitive insight. I'm going to repeat that. Everybody has a world view. And that is the same for everybody, right? Because we all talk, we all say the same thing. But sometimes data will tell you something that's very different. 9 out of 10 times, the analyst that sees something that's counterintuitive discards it because it does not suit their worldview. But the one person or the one time that they go really deep to figure out what the hell is happening here, they come out with an insight that can really be the next S-curve in the growth of the company. I'll give you an example, right? So balance transfer, I don't know how many of you understand credit cards, but balance transfer is when you have loans on one credit card and then you transfer it to a different company, right? So let's say you are HDFC, you have an applicant, you could say, hey, if you have balances with other companies, let's say Axis Card, you move that balance into HDFC. The common thinking was, if a customer is already indebted and they're moving their balances to you, they are higher risk. Simple, right? Everybody operates with that assumption. Then one day an analyst, and this is real, right, from my Cap 1 days. One day an analyst finds that's not true. People who are doing balance transfers seem to be lower risk, right? Then, the culture of the organization started dug deeper and deeper. And finally they realized that is actually true. Because if a customer has, generally when people are applying for a credit card, particularly if you're operating in a subprime space, all of them have debt. It's not like somebody who doesn't have debt comes to you and applies, right? But certain customers want to transfer it to a lower rate because they intend to pay. There are other customers that do not intend to pay. They will not transfer the debt. They will get a new line from you. They will run up the line and then, say tata bye-bye. Example. And just on this counterintuitive insight that came from data, right? Capital One sort of ran with this for like 3 or 4 years and got huge market share. They got like assets from all the banks in the US, right? People, and they would approve people with a higher line when they were doing balance transfer and lower line, so people with lower line didn't come. So all the bad debts remained with the other issuers and the good debts came to Capital One. In a lending business, that's winning versus losing, right? So anyway, that's on data versus intuition. And then this is, again, like integrative thinking. Understanding the business is important. I cannot tell you even this to this day, right? When I talk to my data teams, they don't understand the business. You will have a data scientist from IIT, all like 8 years experience. They've built this really good collections model. Then I sit with them and say, have you been on a collections floor? The answer is no. Okay, you built this using the dependent variable of X. Explain to me why this is the real thing that the collections team needs from you, right? Are they looking for the model to drive efficiency or more collectability? Oftentimes, it's like, deer struck by headlight, right? They're like a wrong question. You ask me about the K-square, you ask me about AUC, I'll answer all of those, right? With algorithm, backward propagation, all of that I can answer. But don't ask me why the business wants it, right? They gave me a requirement, I built a model, my model looks good, it's working, what's your problem, right? So like now when my teams, of course, there's reinforcement and now they know that when they build a model, the first thing they'll do, they'll go sit and take a few collections calls and then they build the model which works much better than blindly throwing data at a, and building thing, right? So curiosity is super important. And this is in no particular order. So the last one I'll say is, like talent is important. If you work in an organization where the non-data people are not analytical, you're in the wrong place. They're never going to appreciate what you do. I'm not saying they should be all, engineers or, scientists or anything, but when you go to them and tell them that this is what you're finding, right? If the senior executive in the room cannot appreciate it, you're wasting your time. There are enough places, and you'll see, right? Successful companies versus not so successful companies. In successful companies, the average data IQ is much higher than in an unsuccessful company, right? So, and of course, when I do my, like I'm sort of not unconventional in many regards, right? So when I do my interviews and my team hates me for it, I give a business case to a data scientist. Simple business case. And that you'll see how, like, first, in fact, now I've asked the recruiters to inform them that I'm going to give a business case, because earlier on, let's give it, and like they'll be like, I'm in the wrong interview or something, I'm like, no, you are joining a business. You're not joining a data function. First, it's a business. You're only as good as the business impact you can drive. Thank you, guys.